My name is Georgia. I'm standing in the middle of a silent, dimly lit conference room. The air is thick with tension, and the faces around me are a mix of shock and disbelief. The will reading, which was supposed to be a straightforward affair, has turned into a storm of revelations. Just moments ago, the attorney representing my father presented a will that placed all the major assets of our family under his control. I sat there, listening to his confident explanation, feeling a growing sense of unease. I knew the truth my mother had painstakingly documented in a hidden storage unit. As I look around the room, I see my father standing near the front, his composure starting to crack. Angela, the woman who had inserted herself into our family so quickly after my mother's death, sits in the front row, her head down, the gold locket my mother used to wear resting motionless against her jacket. My uncle, Greg, who had always admired my father's confidence, now leans back in his chair, his arms no longer folded with the same certainty. It all started a few weeks ago. I was working as a nurse at the local hospital when I received a call from my father. His voice on the other end of the line was calm, but there was an underlying tension. He told me that my mother had collapsed at home, and an ambulance was on its way to the hospital. I rushed to the hospital, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. When I arrived, the ambulance doors were already closed, and my mother was gone. A massive stroke, the doctor said, leaving almost no time for intervention. My father was at the admissions counter, signing forms, as if the death of his wife was just another administrative task. That evening, I drove to my parents' house. The outside looked the same, but inside, something felt off. My mother's reading glasses were still on the bedside table, and a library book lay open where she had left it. But the small locked drawer in her dresser was empty, and the key she always wore around her neck was gone. The next morning, when I returned to help plan the service, I found a woman in the kitchen. She was pouring coffee into my mother's favorite blue mug and wearing my mother's camel-colored cardigan. My father introduced her as Angela, saying she had been helping him through a difficult time. As I looked around the house, I noticed that all the places where my mother stored documents and records had been cleared out. It was as if someone was trying to erase her presence. That night, a man pulled me aside in a quiet hallway outside the visitation room. He told me that my father had been lying to me my entire life. There was another will, a second one, and if my father found out I knew about it, things could get dangerous. He pressed a brass key into my hand, attached to a plastic tag with a storage number written in my mother's handwriting. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I found myself standing in front of a metal roll-up door at an old storage facility outside town. With a shaking hand, I inserted the key into the lock. Inside, I found 3 cardboard boxes. The first box contained a stack of hardcover notebooks. Each entry was carefully dated and described financial transactions. The second box held folders filled with bank statements, insurance forms, and property documents. The third box had a single envelope addressed to me. I sat on the concrete floor and opened the envelope. It was a letter from my mother. She explained that my father had taken control of all the family's financial accounts early in their marriage. At first, it seemed practical, but over time, his control became absolute. He moved money between accounts without her knowledge, and there were insurance documents with signatures she didn't remember writing. She had tried to question him, but he always dismissed her concerns, telling her she was misunderstanding financial details. Eventually, he started telling others that she was confused about money. My mother had written in the letter that the later will was the one that mattered and that an attorney, Mr. Thompson, would explain. I spent the next few days going through the journals and documents. The evidence was clear. My father had been siphoning money from the family accounts for over 2 decades, a total of $312,000. 2 evenings later, my father announced a family dinner. When I arrived, the house was filled with relatives and neighbors. My father raised his glass and spoke about moving forward as a family, and then shifted the conversation to finances. He said the will reading would confirm the arrangement he and my mother had discussed long ago, with him managing the household assets. I sat there, listening to his words, knowing the truth. The journals and bank records were fresh in my mind, creating a chasm between what he was saying and what I knew to be true. On the morning of the will reading, I walked into the conference room. There were more people than I expected. My father stood at the front, looking confident. The attorney representing him read the will, which gave all the major assets to my father. Just as the room was about to accept the decision, Mr. Thompson walked in. He calmly introduced himself and placed a second document on the table. He explained that my mother had signed a later will in his office with 2 witnesses. This will listed me as the primary beneficiary of the house, savings accounts, and a separate insurance policy. Mr. Thompson then presented a report prepared by a forensic accountant, Mr. Davis. The report detailed the financial irregularities, the consistent pattern of money transfers, and the forged signatures on insurance forms. As the details of the report circulated, the room fell silent. My father's composure started to crumble. Greg leaned back, looking stunned, and Angela stared at her hands. In the end, the later will was validated. The property titles were transferred to my name, and my father left the house 2 weeks later, moving into a small rental on the south side of the city. The financial investigation continued. The institutions involved opened internal reviews, and by the beginning of the following winter, the matter had moved into a formal inquiry. Angela left the city before the end of the year, and Greg kept his distance. As for my father, our relationship had reached its end. Our last conversation was brief and formal, a quiet understanding that the bond we once had was broken. I returned to the house after the hearings. Winter had settled in, covering the garden with a thin layer of snow. The rooms were quiet, but the tension that had once filled them was gone. In the corner of the living room, I sat at the wooden desk where my mother had written the journals. I opened one of the notebooks again. The words on the pages were a testament to her courage and determination. She had observed, documented, and left behind the truth for me to uncover. This experience has changed the way I understand courage. Sometimes, it's not about loud confrontations, but about patiently waiting for the right moment to be heard. The truth, no matter how long it's hidden, will always find its way back. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it reminds you that the smallest details we choose to preserve can have a profound impact.